Turning now to growing tensions in Asia. Today, China began a second day of war drills around Taiwan. The Chinese military says its goal is to test its ability to, quote, seize power and occupy key areas. That's quite a statement from China, given concerns in this country about its ambitions. Joining me now to discuss is Republican Congressman from Illinois, Darren LaHood. He sits on the House Intelligence Committee, also the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. Congressman, thanks so much for taking the time.
Jim, good to be with you.
So first, I wonder what your thoughts are on these drills. Of course, it's not the first time that the Chinese military has conducted drills in and around Taiwan. Do you see them, though, particularly in how they've encircled Taiwan with Chinese forces, as a rehearsal, in effect, for a blockade of Taiwan?
Well, I think you got to take it for exactly that. Make no mistake about it, Jim. Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party have talked about taking back Taiwan by 2027, and we have to take them at their word. But when you see the type of provocation with these drills, you see the buildup of their military, you see the provocation in the South China Sea with the building of islands and the adversarial approach they've taken to our allies there. Of course, you have to take it seriously. The other point that I would make, Jim, is China feels like they've won in Tibet. No one talks about Tibet anymore. After all international pressure, they feel like they won in Hong Kong, right?
Yep.
Hong Kong is not the same place it once was. And so Taiwan is next on their list.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time in both those places, and you think the South China Sea as well, with those unsinkable aircraft carriers, as they say, in the islands China has built there. When I visited Taiwan last year, and I know you've had enormous focus on this issue as well, there seemed to be thinking that China was less likely to invade Taiwan D-Day style and possibly more likely attempt to do what we're seeing with these drills: surround, blockade, pressure Taiwan, in effect, into capitulating. Is that your view as well, or do you think both options are still on the table?
I don't think we know yet on that. I think they're trying to, use their might and their pressure to do a number of those things. Listen, I'm glad we passed the supplemental about 6 weeks ago in the Congress that gives roughly about $8-9 billion towards Taiwan. That's a positive step in the right direction. We've also heard a lot about porcupining out Taiwan with the amount of military supplies that we're going to give them and the equipment that they need, whether that's harpoons and javelins and lots of other things. I think we also have to think about things like we did with Australia with the AUKUS agreement. China hates the AUKUS agreement, right? The building of 10 nuclear submarines with Australia. But the other part is we have to work with our like-minded allies in the region that care deeply about the aggression of the Chinese there and build up our naval operations in the region too. All that is going on, but we have to send the strongest possible message. We're not going to allow China to take back the democracy, which is Taiwan.
So the question becomes, how far would the U.S. go to prevent that? As you know, President Biden has said 4 times the U.S. would defend Taiwan militarily, which is, of course, a step beyond the long-held policy of strategic ambiguity. In effect, leave that as an open question. First of all, do you think that's the right move? Should the U.S. commit itself to at least contributing to Taiwan's defense if China were to invade or blockade?
Yes, I think we have to. When you draw a line in the sand, you have to stand by that. And I think we, as a country, need to do that. And that will send a strong message. And you got to continue to be consistent. But I also think you got to build up a coalition similar to what we have in Ukraine right now and other places. That has to be a part of this also.
I've spoken to some of Donald Trump's former senior advisors from the last administration: John Kelly, former chief of staff; John Bolton, former national security advisor. They have said that, in their view, Trump would be unlikely to commit the U.S. to military action to defend Taiwan. I wonder, do you think that U.S. military commitment, as expressed by President Biden, would survive if Trump were to be the president? Do you believe differently? Do you believe Trump would enforce such a red line as well?
Well, I think if you look at the team of national security advisors around President Trump, it's a first-class group of individuals, whether that's Mike Pompeo, John Ratcliffe, People of that caliber, they know the threats from China. I've heard, the former DNI Radcliffe talk about China having a plan to replace the United States. So I think President Trump has a superior national security team around him now, and I have strong confidence they'll make the best decisions. But Xi Jinping does not want to see, in my view, President Trump be the next president. I think he'd prefer to have Biden and the appeasement of the Biden administration than he would President Trump.
The thing is, though, Biden is the one who has said explicitly he would defend Taiwan militarily. John Bolton described to me that Trump in the Oval Office would say Taiwan has no chance against China, and therefore the U.S. should not put itself in between them, in effect. Biden has made that commitment. Trump has not. Should Trump, as he's running to be reelected, say that he would defend Taiwan militarily?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily associate what President Trump's going to do with John Bolton. I would look at other figures: Robert O'Brien, the former national security advisor, Mike Pompeo, John Radcliffe, Devin Nunes. These are people that are close to Trump and giving him advice on that. I think they'd give you a different opinion on that. When you looked at, what we did against China with some of the economic pressure we put on China, it got their attention. And I think you'll see a strong approach from the Trump administration towards China. President Trump knows that China is the biggest threat to America for the future, and we have to win that strategic competition.
Before we go, a quick comment, or a quick question rather, on the situation on the southern border, which I know you focused on as well. Migrant flows, they are expected to surge after months of declining to some degree. A Senate bipartisan deal failed again in the Senate. This was worked out, as you know, among Republican and Democratic senators, and then blocked in the House in February, in part because Trump indicated to GDP lawmakers, in effect, wait for him. Now, my question is, if you believe, as Republicans say they do, and by the way, Democrats as well, that the situation at the border is a crisis, why no urgency to act now, then? If you look at the details of that agreement, it sharply tighten restrictions at the border.
Well, Jim, what I would say to that is we do believe there's urgency. That's why we passed H.R. 2 last summer. H.R. 2 is the strongest immigration bill that would put a stop to what's going on at the southern border. Jim, make no mistake about it. It's an unmitigated disaster at the border. H.R. 2 would put back in place the Remain in Mexico policy, secure the border, support our Border Patrol agents. We passed that in the House. Chuck Schumer never even called it up for a vote. So I agree with you. We need to do this in a bipartisan way. But when you play games like that, when you don't even bring up H.R. 2, that leaves us with not a lot of options. And so to this day, I can't figure out why the Biden administration hasn't administratively or through executive order put the Remain in Mexico policy back in place to help stop this.
I mean, the point is, if we're talking about games, there was a bipartisan plan that came out of the Senate, negotiated by, we're not talking about soft legislators here when you think of a Jim Lankford, for instance, who led the Republican negotiating team there. If the choice, and knowing that H.R. 2 was not going to pass the Senate, if the choice is between nothing and a bipartisan agreement, why isn't that bipartisan agreement the safer choice for the southern border?
Well, I think you can look at this two ways. If H.R. 2 had been brought up in the Senate and had a debate and had a vote on it, that'd be one thing. It wasn't even done. So they gave us no opportunity to even see how we wanted to govern. And by the way, this was last summer we tried to address this. So again, I'm in favor of trying to work in a bipartisan way, but we've had no cooperation on the other side on H.R. 2. And I go back to the Remain in Mexico policy was not a law. That was done through executive order by President Trump. On day one, Biden ripped that up and said, I don't want this anymore. So I think we need to have a conversation. This needs to be addressed. But I worry now that we're so far into an election year that we can't get that done. And I think that's what you saw Schumer bringing this bill up this week. I mean, it failed because I think people realized it was more just a show than it was to get something done.
Well, let's hope there's more bipartisan progress on this going forward. Congressman LaHood, thanks so much for joining the program.
Thank you, Jim.